Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast where we share stories, insights and strategies that go beyond some of the numbers we encounter in our work life. I'm Susan Lee Freeman. I work with organisations who put people first. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't. People who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. And together with my guests, we place a lens on and focus in on the people side of work life. Because we know that it is people who do the work, not numbers. And if we are treated well, we will perform well and might even generate better numbers.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Life Beyond the Numbers. And this week I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Dougal Freeman. Dougal, you're so welcome.
Thank you, Susan. Lovely to be here.
So when I look at your LinkedIn profile, something jumps out quite quickly, and that is a picture of you and a rhino. Would you like to explain?
So growing up in Zimbabwe, we were taught or got heavily involved in conservation. And I've always been interested, particularly conservation in Africa, and had the opportunity to go on the board of the fundraising arm of Old Pejita. And that picture was in fact one of the last two northern white rhinos. And the photograph was taken by a lady called Amy Vitali. I have to say the keeper was off shot, and it was quite nerve-wracking as he said, keep talking to me, because they hear his voice and they get relaxed. So you can probably see if you look close up, I was a little anxious. It's obviously quite big, in one swish of the head and I probably would have been knocked. But I was out with a recent visit with my brother who farms on the slopes of Mount Kenya. He grows roses. I took the opportunity to go around and meet some of the team and obviously see the last two northern white rhinos. It was an opportunity not to be missed, but also to go and spend the night on Old Pejita, which is a fabulous place to stay.
And what is Old Pejita?
It was previously a cattle ranch, and some donors took it over to make it into a conservancy for particularly rhinoceroses and chimpanzees. And I think it has probably one of the largest population of black rhino in East Africa. And it's been very, very successful. It's very successful with anti-poaching. Obviously, it's had a couple of challenges with the lack of tourism for COVID. But it's, I guess, one of the success stories of, wildlife improvement and enhancement in East Africa at the moment. They pay particular attention to working closely with the local community to make sure that there's a benefit of wildlife rather than just wealthy tourists that come in and come out to see what's going on.
How are they working with the local community to make sure it's not just wealthy tourists coming in and out?
For example, it's very dry at the moment, and they are in talks with providing limited access to grazing for some villages' cattle. Obviously, there's jobs that some of the people depend on. They have an integrated operation on part of the place where they still ranch cattle and slaughter it and sell beef to the local market. They will then buy animals from the surrounding villages. So there's sort of access to the supply chain piece. And I think the success of this kind of operation will be about working closely with the people in whose community in which you live.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And tell me, you mentioned at the beginning that there were the last two remaining white rhinos in the world, northern
white rhinos. And there's a program at the moment to, I believe the embryos have been extracted. I'm not quite sure the technical details, but they're trying to implant those into white rhinos to bring the population back from the brink.
Wow.
Information can easily be found on Google, Old Pejita.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes. Yeah. So you live in the UK, Dougal, but you mentioned you grew up in Zimbabwe.
So yeah, I was born in Zimbabwe, did all of my school there. I went to St. George's College, a very long-standing Jesuit college there. And then after that, started to drift into thinking about what I wanted to do. So there was holiday jobs with my father, who was in Malawi at that stage, starting to work on what was the old paper-based accounting system. And I remember many of my holidays was involved in extracting the accounting balances from what many of you might know as the ledger or the general ledger, which, and for others, a very, very large book full of the different accounting balances. And
you mean a paper book?
A paper book, to make sitting there with a calculator, making sure all the debits and credits balanced.
So going through like a paper file or paper files with a calculator, and how many transactions are you talking about?
It was a mechanical book where you added extra pages, and I think it was about 500 pages, and with probably 700 or 800 ledger accounts, and all numbered, all beautifully numbered, and it had to be extracted for the auditors. And it was when the accounts were then prepared by hand. The last stage was then typed up for the auditors to all the audit schedules, and everything was all handwritten. So at that stage, he was working on a sort of group of tobacco funds in Malawi, and I guess an early sort of dip into the agricultural world.
And actually, funny that you say that, because as I looked through your profile on LinkedIn, two main themes jumped out at me. Now, I think there's lots of themes, but two main themes throughout your career, and I think that's agriculture and accounting seem to be kind of intertwined, and also working between the for-profit world and not-for-profit world. So you've talked a little bit about what drew you, I suppose, perhaps to agriculture and accounting. Was that it? Was it working with your dad in Malawi that sparked an interest?
No, I was starting to study for my management accounting qualification, and I left to the UK and got a job with an agricultural management consulting firm based in Bath, where they were doing lots of interesting project work in Africa, and I was still at that stage building up my bookkeeping experience, was the purchase ledger clerk, and started working there for a bit. I got made redundant, and somebody suggested, why didn't I go to university? And as a mature student who'd been in the UK, somebody suggested White College, and I was interested in a BSc in agricultural business management, and still has an excellent global reputation. So we went off to Y down in Kent. It's now part of Imperial College, to do a BSc in agri-business management, but also kept my foot in the accounting door, funding my studies and the odd trip home back to Malawi via working at a local firm of chartered accountants in Bath. It was quite funny being a mature student at 23, and I was the old guy at the end of the corridor, sort of 5 years older than everybody else. I was getting itchy feet at the end of that and wanted to get back to Africa. So wrote to, as far as I know at the time, every single company that had direct interests in agribusiness in Africa, and ended up...
Every single company where?
Listed on the stock exchange. I recall probably writing about 22 letters, but these were done on an old electric typewriter. We had to book time at university to use the printers and the computers, and it was quite a challenge. And I felt that, writing an important letter, it should be done on a typewriter or by hand rather than on the old dot matrix printer. They hadn't had laser printers then. So I was fortunate enough to literally, I understand the timing of my letter at an office in London of the company I went to work for. The individual whose job I took had resigned, and our letters crossed on the desk the same day, and went out to work in a place called Cholo in Malawi, the tea growing area, as the assistant general manager responsible for finance, procurement, logistics, on a 22,000 acre tea, coffee and macadamia operation, all of it for export pretty much.
So had you done your accountancy qualification at this time as well?
I was about halfway through and went out on quite a low level of pay and thought I'd prove myself. The company was keen that I continue to study and continue to proceed through CIMA, Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. At that stage, you had to write all 4 exams and pass all 4 in one go to move on. So I did fail a tax paper and had to resit the whole stage. But I went out, proved myself and got pay increases. But, I cut my teeth there. It was part of the listed UK PLC. So we had quite a heavy emphasis on compliance and reporting figures in to meet stock exchange requirements for the group. But at the same time, for example, the payroll was done manually, and we had 9,000 people in the sort of busy season.
Whoa.
Everybody was paid weekly. And you had a payroll team of about 30 who were doing paper-based calculations.
A payroll team of 30 people?
Yeah. This all then had to be calculated, sent into the bank. The cash, because everybody was paying cash, had to come back with security, and then teams would be sent out on payday. And some of the workers could only ever put a thumbprint because many people were illiterate. And you had to watch out for things like, the same thumbprint turning up in the pay slips, because people would pay villagers to come in and just put thumbprints down for ghost workers. But if you wanted the payroll to get done, you had to learn to chivvy the team along and understand any hiccups or pick up any issues from a particular part of the estate where the pay might be delayed or slow. And then, of course, it was all task-based, so you had to make sure that you weren't being scammed by people putting rocks in the green leaf bags, or one common problem was women would be given extra kilograms of coffee cherry picked if they'd had sex with the manager.
Oh, Jesus.
So sort of fraud and control environments. It was my early sort of baptism by fire. I do recall we were building some staff housing, and we had to put security on after had put wet cement and new bricks down, because if you weren't careful, you would suddenly find there would be a new house going up in the village and all of your freshly laid walls would have been stolen. The same would happen with a newly sprouted field of maize. If the plants were maybe 2 or 3 inches high, you drove past at lunchtime and you drove back, and the whole lot would have gone, and it would have been transplanted throughout the village. So getting a feel for control environments, what may or may not happen, getting a sense for, looking beyond the numbers to see where and how things could be managed. It was a real baptism by fire, but an immensely enjoyable part. I did, to my surprise, end up working very close to where my grandfather was working in the 30s.
Really?
He'd been out looking for areas to grow tobacco and had been involved in planting some tea, probably a couple of miles from my house back in the 30s. And I believe those same tea bushes are still growing. Tea is quite a resilient plant if you look after it. So it was a good first step into the sort of agricultural world, but looking clearly at how numbers, money and cash can sort of wash through quite a big enterprise at the time.
Amazing. That's like a fascinating story. And I just can't even imagine the volume of, transactions, but also just like the space. What did you say? 22,000 acres. So what is that like? Could you see the whole estate from where you were?
No, you had to drive around, and it would probably take you a day to drive around. Most of it was contiguous, but there were some blocks that were owned, that were separate. So you would go off to other blocks. You had to have radios with you. And just another example, we had to feed everybody every day. I was responsible for buying the maize and the beans. And in the main season, we'd go through about 1.5 tons of sugar, because everybody wanted sugar in their tea, probably about every 2 or 3 weeks.
Whoa! So it really was an at-scale operation.
And you had to protect or mitigate potential loss with pretty much everything used: fertilizer, beans, maize, tea,
sugar,
diesel, sugar.
Wow. You moved to the UK or to Europe at one point, but you kept a foothold in Africa, I believe?
So after the tea estate, I came back to the UK to sort of think about what to do next, and was really interested at seeing how the smallholder leaf growers were integrated on the boundary of the estate into the main sort of commercial agriculture, because it's the only way they could probably maintain their livelihoods. So many tea estates used to buy green leaf from the smallholders. So really, having been to Y, it was an obvious choice to go to Reading. So I did an MSc in Agricultural Development Economics at Reading, and that was sort of at the start of, or probably me dipping into some sort of NGO work to pay the bills. I did a spell with the American Refugee Committee in Kosovo, and another spell in Rwanda. And this was more about helping sort out finances, financial control systems, setting up teams. But the extra piece to that was dealing with a completely different range of sort of ethnicity and people issues. In particular in Kosovo, it was at the time just after the war there in the Balkans. And, the security team from the American Refugee Committee insisted we have RPG screens on the windows because we had Serbians, Albanians, Kosovars all working. And the tension sometimes in the office was palpable. And getting things done, you had to start to think about how to keep people in on a common goal despite some of the rivalry or
politics
that people brought with them to the office.
Yeah.
Rwanda was quite a while after genocide, and the pieces I remember distinctly are the children and adults who had injuries. People's ears had been chopped off, or maybe somebody still had a machete wound in their head. I was only there for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and that was quite a tough sort of assignment.
Having been to Rwanda myself in 2003, I think it was, which was less than 10 years since the genocide, there was such a heavy atmosphere. And yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, very heavy. It was quite, it'll stick in my mind for a long time.
Yeah.
So my brother was working in Kenya. He was doing horticulture at university with a sort of mixed agricultural farm in Mount Kenya. I started getting an advisory role there to help them set up their finance system, make sure they could report properly, look at controls, look at the finance team, and family-run business. Again, completely different challenges to deal with when you've got family involved who are shareholders and employees. So I started that. It dovetailed very nicely into being able to stay with my brother and enjoy some of the fantastic scenery that is East Africa. And I would go out, stay with my brother, get stuck into their finance system. So again, kept a toehold in Africa as I was starting to think and consider other options.
And I mean, this farm, what was going on there?
Wheat and barley.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're one of Kenya's biggest malt and barley growers. And what's really critical is the nitrogen content of malt and barley, so you can make good lager beer. Years ago, when I believe one of the founding family members set it up, it obviously still had sheep. They used to do sheep for wool, but that market went out quite a while ago. And timber, they were moving into flowers with my brother was driving that project. The other interesting project that they had going for me, which I thought was really impressive, was they were getting women to grow on the boundary again to grow fresh peas. These would be steamed and bagged on the farm and then sold into markets in Nairobi. So a bit of value adding, but again, a large landowner in a geopolitically quite sensitive area, water scarce, integrating smallholders and villages on their boundary into the agricultural supply system, which without such access and scale would have been a challenge for some people. And I think the owners at the time were realizing they had to think about returns to water use, returns to land use. So having sort of large scale livestock and sheep perhaps is not the most appropriate, and you could employ more people, certainly in horticulture. So in the roses and the greenhouses, your numbers of staff increase, and then looking at how you can get the people, your neighbours, involved in what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that started to crystallize in my mind based on my Malawi experience, and then obviously going to look at a straightforward arable agriculture operation, you can potentially see if you get your control environment wrong, you can see the impact straight away. For example, on a wheat field, if somebody's stolen 50% of the fertilizer, the application rate's gone down, but within months you can see the impact of the low growth obviously your yields will drop. You can see it straight away. And the other piece that, where you can see value destruction in the business, if you think of horticultural operations, much of the value of that is vested in the management team. And
in what way, Dougal?
Because if you, and I know quite a bit about roses, if you neglect roses, it's a 365-day-a-year operation. The quality and value deteriorates very, very quickly. And it will take you time and money to get the quality back up, the number of stems per hectare back up. So a business that may be generating $5 to $6 million a year with X number of stems can very quickly, the yields will drop if you neglect it, you don't spray properly, or the agrochemicals have been stolen, or the personal protective equipment's been stolen, or the water pipes. If you neglect your controls and your monitoring, and something will happen every single day, whether it's harvesting, spraying cycles, and you leave it for a couple of weeks, you will run into problems that you will see coming through in the numbers, yield loss, quality loss, and it's difficult to recover.
And is it difficult to get the right management in place? I'm just thinking about, like, if we compare it to any other organization that isn't doing products, like a lot of us would have worked in the kind of knowledge working, and obviously management has a huge role to play there as well. So I guess it's the same in any business. The senior management, the team need to really care about what they do.
Yeah, I think it's the same in any business. If you are the team, need to really care about what they do. And if you have a horticultural and agribusiness at scale, and you're prepared to accept a slightly lower or less of a return overall in your commercial business cycle, then you'll accept that some theft happens, you'll accept that things go wrong. But actually, if you really want to, optimize your business, it's all about the team, it's all about the people. And if you have got people, and this is based on my experience in East and Southern Africa, if you've got people who are really good at what they do, well rewarded and well remunerated and understand, and there's a bit more of a worker management relationship, then value and output can be maintained, whether you're farming wheat or whether you're growing roses or blueberries. Ultimately, I think your returns will be better because you won't have control issues, or you'll have few of them. I'm not saying that you'll never get on top of everything. You'll have fewer control problems, you'll have fewer theft issues, you'll have fewer leakage if it's wheat flour, and it will be reflected in the value of your business.
Wow, cool. And that's really interesting. And I sometimes, I think, forget about other industries other than some of the places I've worked myself, which was mainly about getting people to do, very paper-based work as opposed to often growing things. So the other side of the coin, we've talked a lot actually about agriculture and accounting, and also I think the for-profit world. And we started to dip into the not-for-profit world or humanitarian work. And I can see that you've worked in Mine Action, you've been in a number of the world's hotspots, you've worked in nutrition, a wide range of different organizations. And so I'm curious, what was it like to be in Jordan at the beginning of the Second Gulf War?
So it's quite a bit like a slow motion train wreck, because you could sit in Jordan at night having a beer in the only pub you were allowed into as a non-Muslim, watching CNN and Al Jazeera and watch the build-up of the troops and soldiers. Yet you were sitting in what appeared to be on the face of it quite an English pub, having a beer, but people were leaving, flights were reducing. And certainly on my last flight into Oman, there were 3 people on the flight. The air crew were not staying the night that night, they were dropping people off literally and flying back out to Amsterdam.
So what were you doing there?
So I was the regional financial controller for CARE. At that stage, the group of officers, which I was responsible for, Iraq, Jordan, and Yemen, who were doing primarily humanitarian programming, but some development work, particularly in Jordan and Yemen. We reported into CARE Australia, so I was there to look after the money for what turned out to be an 18-month contract. It was some straightforward, you had a program or contract, we had to deliver activity, whether it was teaching people about grey water reuse in Jordan, I think everybody's aware it's a very, very water scarce area, to making sure water networks, water pipes in Iraq the leaks were repaired and things were functioning. Certainly before the war started, we had a big challenge getting money for the Iraq office because of the severe penalties Saddam Hussein put on people changing money illegally. So we used the Hawala system to get money into Iraq.
And explain what the Hawala system is.
It's a system of trust where you make a payment to somebody and they will deliver money to where you want it to go. And we never had a problem, ever. You would pay money to a bank in Dubai or a bank in the UK or a bank in Malaysia, and the money would turn up in the office in Baghdad at the appropriate time with the appropriate security arrangements in full. There was a fee on it, but it was certainly an amazing way to transfer money.
And we're talking about like large sums of money.
Up to upwards of $1 million,
yeah,
American.
Yeah.
So during the time there, obviously it shifted into a sort of humanitarian response phase, and I was fortunate enough to go in to visit the Baghdad office. And that was an incredibly well-established office with 400 staff, a great system from a financial perspective in controls, approvals, vouchers. It short was paper-based, but actually it was pretty well run. I know many commentators say about leakage on aid, things in, from my experience, this is far from the case. Money was well spent, money was spent correctly, and there was impact. And it was plain to be seen. One of the biggest challenges I had was we were putting a new finance system in. We had to sort of recreate a full set of books on books and accounts for CARE Australia. We managed to do it on time, but it was a real challenge because I had a team of ethnic, multi-religious, multi-gendered, and there was a whole lot of political, religious, gender-based issues and challenges between the team, and clearly people didn't like each other because of religion. They didn't like the women members of the team, or they didn't like the Kenyan members, or the Bangladeshi members didn't like the Jordanians. And it was a real challenge, and I had to continually and persistently remind people that we were all working for CARE, that we had a common goal. Some of them were working for CARE because it was just a job. Some of them chose to work for CARE because they liked the organisation. But persistently and continually reminding people that we needed to achieve this. It was important to sit and listen to people sometimes and let them vent their frustrations. And if they were being insulting or rude to other members of the team, you had to steer them back, but being cognizant of any religious issues or ethnicity issues or gender issues. And the team ranged from a fantastic old gentleman who had done his chartered accounting training under the old UK Arab board to a very, very super smart Yemeni lady who was training under ACCA, and then a whole host of individuals in between. And my big learning there was you really need to sit and understand the people in the team and what's behind things if you want to get stuff done. It's not about just putting extra fertilizer on a wheat crop. You have to really work with and immerse yourself in some of the challenges that may be petty on the face of it, but actually mean something to people.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking, like, you're talking about people from many different countries there as well. And so what language did people speak in? And like, with some of the things going on in language that you couldn't understand, for example?
Yeah, the language of the office was English. However, I'm pretty sure that my Arabic is non-existent or very little. I know very little, that people were insulting other people in Arabic. They may have been insulting or discussing people in Swahili. So there was definitely a sort of undercurrent, if there were issues on days there were, where things were going on or people were exclaiming in their own language, and you just had a sense of that something wasn't quite right.
And you said you were there, I think, 18 months, Dougal. So clearly during that time, the conflict in Iraq escalated.
Yeah, it started to get worse. And I worked very closely with a lady called Margaret Hassan, who unfortunately was murdered sort of post my departure from Iraq. But Margaret was very conscientious. I talked earlier about the control issues, and I remember...
She was an Irish lady, wasn't she, Margaret?
That's right.
Yeah.
She was a teacher. She had a very, very, very good reputation. And when the office would take us out for lunch, you would walk into somewhere and the team you were with would say to some of the security staff at the restaurant, he works with Margaret. And that was enough to get you into a restaurant to have lunch, because she was widely respected. I remember one note of apology where one of the buildings where she used to fax the accounts through to meet her deadlines got hit by an American missile, and she apologized for the delay because she had to go elsewhere, but her main aim was to get the accounts through on time. But unfortunately, having narrowly escaped the bombing of the Canal Hotel, I left there about 30 minutes before, the UN hotel, which got blown up by a truck bomb where the Sergio de Mello was killed.
Oh, yeah.
And I think 22 people killed in total. I'd been sitting in the internet cafe writing emails to friends and family saying I'm stuck in the Canal Hotel. When they ran through saying that my name was on the passenger list, could I please go to the convoy? And dropped everything and ran. And we headed out to the airport and boarded the plane, and didn't understand why my mobile phone went into meltdown in Jordan. Hadn't known it. I was in a bit of shock when obviously other people I had meetings with and some of the people I saw had died, and it was, quite a surreal moment.
So basically you had left that hotel 30 minutes before the bomb hit.
Yes.
And then you're on a plane with people trying to reach you thinking you're in the hotel.
Yeah. We were on a plane, I think there was 5 people on the plane, drinking a cold beer, thinking, left Baghdad, that's great because it was really hot. Not a care in the world at that stage. So it was a real shock, and I think it took me a long time to process that on reflection.
And also you mentioned that your boss, Margaret, had been murdered.
Yeah, so having left after the Canal Hotel, I was still based in Jordan for a bit, and then there were threats made against the office, and CARE had a very good security team, and we were told we could no longer go into Baghdad. And then unfortunately, Margaret got kidnapped, and the word was that it must have been, somebody from outside Baghdad because of her reputation. And unfortunately, some months later in November, discovered she'd been murdered.
I remember that story from way back when. So, gosh, I mean, working in an office in Oxford sounds very, very safe and maybe quite boring in comparison to some of that work. But before we get to what you do now, I'd also like to talk to you about Mine Action, because I spent a lot of time in Mine Action myself, as you know, and worked for MAG, the Mines Advisory Group, prior to you working there. And Mine Action, I suppose, working in that sector is something that has stayed with me for many years. And we've talked about this before, but it's about seeing the impact of the work.
Yeah, I immensely enjoyed the field visits, because you could sit, for example, and have a drink of tea with a Vietnamese rice farmer who was getting his land back. And I don't speak Vietnamese at all, but the elation and the relief of being able to go and dig your fields is palpable. We even send your kids to school through a track across the field, knowing that they won't be hurt or injured potentially. That was a real buzz. And equally the dedicated staff who worked full mag. If you were sitting trying to work out some problems with a payroll maybe in Angola, or you were trying to, train some local staff in Beirut on a new system, I really enjoyed the understanding and dealing with colleagues who English, maybe their third language or fourth language. But when you get a feel for people and you can try and empower and push them, you can get some great results from them. And the impact of MAG is very binary. Land is cleared, hospitals are built, roads are demined, stuff can happen. Although I nearly didn't quite make it, as I was late for my interview. The first time I've ever been late for an interview. And I did offer, I said at this senior level, to be late is not acceptable. So I offered to walk away, and so I didn't. So I did an 18-month spell there, but it was fantastic. I remember being in the valley in Vietnam where we were going to a big demolition of some Mark II 750-pound bombs.
That had been
dropped by the Americans and had been recovered. Demolitions were very ordered and done in a controlled way. So areas were cleared, they were put in a pit. There was a particular site at which many of these bombs would be disposed of. We were told to stay behind a blast wall about a kilometre away when the demolition went off, and you could hear the fragments of effectively hot cast iron was passed to you. And I actually have a pair of cufflinks from one of the fragments that I collected, just to sort of sober reminder of
the damage
and what's gone on. And I can remember sitting there thinking, gosh, this is only 2 bombs. Can you imagine if day after day, hundreds of bombs? And it was...
And designed to explode like that, with fragments going out of them.
Yeah.
And having witnessed a demolition myself in Cambodia I was in, it is quite surreal. The sound, the cloud of smoke, everything that goes around it, and the danger that people working in mine action face every day, and the work they do to make the world a safer place is quite phenomenal.
Indeed, it's one of the... Interestingly, I think you have more chance of being injured on a building site in the UK than working in mine action, because the processes and controls for working in a field are so tight, and obviously you have to follow them. So although I might be a senior member of staff, if we were out on a field visit, you were under control of the technical operations manager, and you had to follow absolutely everything. Otherwise, catastrophic failure could mean death. And it's a powerful field to work in, because there's very clear impacts, but if things go wrong, obviously it can impact the staff the wrong way. But yet, to see many of the children or people who've lost legs or limbs, it's quite devastating.
I've got all these stories going through my head of my time in mine action as well, and it's a great reminder of how I suppose that there are still many dangers lurking out there, and that people are doing amazing work in the non-profit world, and it often gets poo-pooed. I can remember one time being back in Ireland and somebody asking me, well, what do you do as you're an accountant, are you giving out food on the side of the road? And me thinking, oh my God, every penny has to be accounted for. This is real work with real people, real lives. But before I go on a rant, which I can feel is coming on, maybe from your perspective, Dougal, you've worked across the non-profit sector and for-profit world, so you've been immersed in both and still are. What are the main differences or challenges to work across both of those?
I think some of the challenges are similar. Certainly if you have a broad geographic spread of countries, whether it's Africa or the Middle East, you get hit with trying to do your consolidation to report into the group for the stock exchange, or to report to the donors, and actually there's power cuts, or the finance officer in Angola's can't get through because the road's flooded and you've got to wait. So you can get some similar challenges. It doesn't matter whether it's for profit or not for profit. The other piece, I think the not-for-profit world is perhaps less forgiving. You cannot put your prices up. It's like running a business in a low-margin environment. There's very little room for error. And sometimes you don't have a balance sheet with a lot of reserves on, so if there's mistakes are made, the business can, or the organisation could go under quite quickly. So it requires, both sectors you need to have tight management. Both you need to have good internal controls, you need to have robust systems. You also, in the not-for-profit sector, you need to think actually that you're spending effectively your own money because you're a taxpayer, and much of development assistance is taxpayer funded. Of course, there are the philanthropists like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others, but ultimately, in the end of the day, much development work or humanitarian work is taxpayer funded, and it's got to be spent well. And it's a real challenge to get everything lined up to make sure that the actions, outputs, and outcomes are delivered in line with the funding proposal to meet the donor requirements. It's a little bit easier, in my view, in a for-profit, because actually you've got to stick to almost one set of financial reporting guidelines. UK it's FRS 102, and if you're doing a set of statutory accounts, say in Kenya, it's International Financial Reporting Standards. But in not-for-profit, you've got the donor accounting requirements, you have the statutory pieces of the charity or the entity through which you're doing it, and then obviously the parent entity. And squaring those three up is often quite a challenge, because you may find that you're compliant with your donor or client, but actually you need to change something to report under UK charity. It doesn't matter where you work, you still have to, make sure you've got the right team doing the right thing, and you've got to be conscious of the other side, the anti-corruption, the fraud and bribery, the safeguarding. There's all of the other pieces that will have an impact on your overall control environment, which for me then flows into what happens with the money and how you account for things. And if you get all of that right, you can run quite a sort of tight ship, as it were. But it's no good just focusing on the finance, because there's all the extras that happen, whether it's procurement, whether it's HR matters and how people are employed, and any underlying ethnicity, cultural issues within an office that you need to understand to make sure that you can deliver what you're setting out to do. So sometimes I think the challenges in both sectors are the same, and certainly and particularly GAIN, where growth and impact is the business. The organisations have been very successful at doing stuff, but often people neglect the back office, and whether it's technically correct group consolidations or making sure that a set of accounts are prepared under Swiss GAAP, you can end up with quite a mess if you don't get your basic accounting and controls right. And GAIN was a particular challenge. Done some really fantastic stuff over the years, but like many places, the finances have been neglected. And actually, Susan, I recall you had reconciled 13 years of accounts just to make sure that actually we had a platform for which to build and develop the changes.
Yeah, I think it was one of my career highlights, actually, was doing that piece of work. And I used to carry around this red folder, if you remember, Dougal.
I remember it well.
With all going back, because we couldn't determine the split between restricted income and unrestricted income in 100% certainty. And we also were not sure whether or not there had ever been any fraud. That's and right. To do that, we had to unravel every single piece of income that had come in and gone out of the organisation back over 13 years. It took me months and months to do it, and it ended up with a number of adjustments to the accounts, if I recall correctly. Right. Thanks for the reminder of that.
I think the evidence that I was going in the right direction was the support provided by the Gates Foundation to continue with the systems and process and control changes, and they provided substantial monetary support for me to do that while the organisation was in a period of transition.
Gates did.
Gates did, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I had a lot of communication, collaboration with the Gates Foundation, who were big funders of GAIN, and they were keen that we put the organisation on a firm footing. And I think the evidence is there today that it's grown, and GAIN is continuing to do the good things.
Absolutely. And the basics were put in place again. And just so everybody knows what GAIN is, perhaps you just say what the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition was all about.
A couple of the key things, really. One was large-scale food fortification, putting folic acid and vitamins into flour, bread flour primarily, and cooking oil. And the other piece was around touching on salt iodization, in particular dealing with the challenges of salt consumption versus making sure your iodine consumption is correct. And then, of course, monitoring and evaluating the impacts of what these actions were, the large-scale fortification was doing. And the other piece I think I was really delighted to be involved in is the spin-out of the Access to Nutrition Index, which is a standalone entity on its own right now. And I encourage you to look it up on Google and see what good work it does. And that was great being involved with that. I was able to turn my hand at some fascinating negotiations with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. We had a 22-partner public-private partnership put together around looking at value chains in vegetables across East Africa. And this was everybody from Unilever through to a small Tanzanian NGO involved in producing vegetable seeds. And so that was a real challenge, but quite a challenging program to implement and deliver. But being involved right at the outset in the commercials and the legals was a real fascinating way of seeing how development, not-for-profits and for-profit companies and organizations can be brought together to deliver something
of value.
And
as a senior finance leader, because you've done a number of senior finance roles in the last, 15, 20 years, what would be maybe a bugbear or a frustration for you at times?
I guess just being referred to as the finance guy or the numbers person, because actually there's so much more based on my breadth and depth of experience. I bring it's more than just the numbers.
It's definitely life beyond the numbers we've been talking about here today.
Absolutely. That's probably the biggest one. And then the other one obviously is in the not-for-profit side, people really not understanding the sector, what people are trying to do and how people spend money, whether you're in conservation, whether you're in humanitarian work or the development side of things.
I suppose we tend to write, there's a bad story or bad publicity about something, and we colour the whole sector with that rather than looking at individual organisations based on their merit and their deliverables.
Yeah, I think it's very true.
Yeah, which is a shame. And we've talked a lot about teams and people here as well. And I just wonder, looking back at your career now and in all the countries you've worked in and all the different cultures and gender norms and whatever it is, what is maybe something that you're really proud of that you achieved with people?
God, that's a challenging question to answer. I'm probably the biggest piece is watching a number of colleagues who I've hired, who I've worked with, imparted knowledge to, go on to have really successful careers, who have all said they've enjoyed working with me, felt empowered, supported, encouraged. And this is men and women in all many different countries, to see them really move on when they're ready to move on, but knowing that actually they've got something out of working for me. And it's not about me per se, it's about the impact on other people, giving people a chance and a break.
Lovely. Of course, putting people first is one of the things I talk about, and that's music to my ears, as you know. So look, Dougal, I mean, we've absolutely run out of time here, but I know that you're currently the CFO of an organisation called Oxford Policy Management, and you're part of what history might call the Great Resignation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So having joined Oxford Policy Management in 2018, the recent sort of job was around resetting the team there, a complete sort of restructure and rebuild of the finance systems, I've achieved all the sort of goals I set myself. We've recently had a year end where the business is in great shape, a decent profit levels have been returned to. There's a decent pile of cash in the bank, and it's time for me to move on to another challenge. And I'm sure many CFOs or finance professionals out there will understand it's a good time to leave after a decent year end. So I took the plunge and popped the resignation in, and so I'm currently carefully considering my next challenge. Not really sure whether it's going to be for profit or not for profit, but looking for something that excites and interests me and where I can get involved, particularly on the people side of things, and bring my skill and experience to bear to prove and shape whichever organisation I join for.
It sounds like you're in a job interview here with me now, but that's really interesting because you've left without another job to go to. And are there certain sectors that you're more interested in? And when you say a challenge, I'm assuming you don't want to end up in a war zone again or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't want to end up in a war zone again. I still like the sort of development sector. I'm obviously interested in sort of these, conservation and sustainability, supply chain related. I have a burgeoning interest in sort of renewable power and renewable energy and how that's being rolled out in particularly places like East Africa. So
you're having a good look.
I'm having a good look. I want to make a careful choice about where I go next. I'm not in a rush, and always happy to chat to people.
Fantastic. Look, wow, there's so much in that. An amazing career so far, Dougal, and wishing you absolutely the best with whoever is lucky enough to work with you going forward. But if anyone would like to connect with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Reach out on LinkedIn, drop me a message there. I'm always happy to have a coffee or chat with people, even if it's junior finance professionals who want a bit of help and advice. Delighted to talk to people. The more people you talk to, the better. You can always learn something and you never stop learning.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. And I certainly learned from you here today as well. Thank you so much for your time, Dougal.
It's a pleasure.
And I'm sure we'll speak again.
I'm sure we will.
Thank you for listening today. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you know who would enjoy it too. I believe we are all entitled to enjoy our work, and the future of work life will be changed by those who put people first and create more fulfilling work lives for themselves, their colleagues, their teams and organisations. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to have covered, guests you'd like to hear from, or questions for me, please drop a line to susan@beyond-thenumbers.com. And finally, please consider leaving a review.